Please welcome Vice President of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, Viktor Hamm.
Welcome, friends. It was wonderful to have the Vice President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Armenia as warm-up speakers to this conference and to this panel. So, thank you. Thank you for joining us today for this important panel discussion on the nature and the future of the IRF movement and its potential to positively shape the field of religious freedom worldwide. And we are deeply honored to have a distinguished panel of experts with us today to discuss the topic, building on the success of the global IRF movement. So, my friends, would you please welcome the distinguished panel, starting with Honorable Tristan Azbej. He is the Hungary's State Secretary for the Aid of Persecuted Christians. Please welcome Ms. Lizzi Francis Brink, the Legal Counsel for Global Religious Freedom with ADF International. And then again, please welcome Honorable David Smith, Member of Parliament and the UK Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. It is wonderful to have all of you here, my friends, on the stage, and this is certainly the kind of the summary panel that we have today. And I would like to open up with a few words and then pose a question to all of you. Every meaningful movement in history has key building blocks. And these building blocks don't just determine whether the movement is successful, they determine actually the very essence of the movement. And I come from a Christian movement that started back in the days with a very small group of persecuted followers of Jesus. And by today, it's one of the largest movements in the world. 2.4 billion people consider themselves Christians. And the building blocks of the Christian movement are well defined and are well known. It's the person of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's the mission, go into the world. It's a very simple and yet profound, universally applicable message. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Then there is a statement of servant leadership. Then there is grassroots involvement, training, measurable results, and certainly the divine favor. My question to all of you, my friends, is what are the core components or the building blocks of the IRF movement? And we'll start with Honorable David Smith.
Thank you, Reverend Hamm, and welcome everyone. It's good to be here. I feel like there's a lot of pressure on me because I'm perhaps the newest in the role. I was appointed as UK Special Envoy in December. So yes, I am here really to try and learn from myself your question. But one of the things that struck me the most in the few days that we've been here is that this is something, as in freedom of religion and belief, is only something that we can do together. I think we have to recognize our common humanity. I think we have to understand that anybody can be persecuted for their religion or their belief, or for their lack of belief, for that matter. And that only through joint working can we achieve this together. It's why I'm here this week, because the UK government, as significant as it is in the world, can't do this on its own. And I would humbly and gently say that even the United States, the most powerful country in the world, the most influential country in the world, can't tackle the depth of the lack of freedom of religion or belief on its own. We need to be able to do that together. So I would like to think that this is an area that we can work in a very multilateral way. So solidarity is probably an old-fashioned word, but that would be something that I think I would hold to dearly.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Lizzi, how about you?
I like the question because it makes us think about the absolute foundations and the basics And I'd say two things. The first is the need for a clear, definable mission, what we stand for, and that would be the human right to religious freedom, of course. This transcends what's written down. I believe it's based in natural law and upon the human dignity of each individual person. But we have this written down for us, articulated in the international agreements. And of course, Article 18 is the bedrock upon which everything else is based upon. And because it's so clearly articulated, it really is a good basis to build the movement on, the fact that everybody is included. Every single person has that right. And it's both in the privacy of their own minds and their conscience, but also publicly in their manifestation of it and how they live it out. And I think we need to start with that basic foundation, the core text. And then second of all, I'd say a bedrock is a clear understanding and a vision of how do we advocate for our neighbour. It was said earlier today about a neighbour, and that could be somebody next to us or at the back of the room, but more often than not, it's the person we haven't met before. It's the person we haven't heard their story. Until now, we haven't even been to their country, but we still believe in their dignity and their inherent human right to religious freedom so much that we're willing to advocate for it. We're willing to go onto the ground and find out the information and the facts. We're willing to then advocate for them, use wonderful politicians who stand up for that, and other networks of policy, and then also fight for their freedoms in the courts as well. So we learn to advocate for somebody else, and I think those two things together are our bedrock.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lizzi. Secretary Azbej.
Who are the building blocks of the international religious freedom movement? My first answer to that is that all those who are true followers politically correct to the 300 million persecuted Christians. So at that time, Hungary was so dedicated, so specific about supporting Christians, that we were trying to influence this international arena, to go against the idea that everyone deserves human dignity and protection, but Christians. But you see, what we do is very specific, very, very targeted. And you, this very diverse group of people and organizations here, enabled us to extend our solidarity from Christians to the Yazidi and the other groups from the Jewish community in Yemen, for example. And also you enabled us that where we are weak, where we don't have capacity, that is international human rights advocacy, you complemented our capabilities. We bring in the humanitarian aspect, all the others bring in the human rights aspect, and I think this is our strength together, and this is how we should create a mutual, holistic approach.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. Every movement faces, as we all know from history, internal and external challenges, and sometimes the internal challenges are greater than the external challenges. And personal agendas, loss of focus, lack of integrity, just to name a few. Lizzi, Francis, Brink, I have a question for you. What are the key challenges the IRF movement faces in the pursuit of global success?
Challenges, like you said, can be external, things outside of our control, but also internal. And I was reflecting on this question and thinking of three things internally where we can lose our focus and our vision, things that we can control. The first of those things is if we lose our vision for our mission statement. What I said at the very beginning, the fact that we do have a core set of beliefs that we all as an international community sign up to. Now, as we grow, we may want to expand the network and then perhaps dilute the international religious freedom right. And there is a danger in that. We want to grow and we want to expand, but we also want to hold on to what we believe and also hold others to account for that, not at the not to expand too much for the sake of that. And second of all, we could also expand the right. Religious freedom sits alongside other human rights, such as freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and family rights, but that doesn't mean the definition needs to be expanded to include or intersect other rights into that, and we have to be careful to keep a clear vision and focus. I think the second thing that can be a challenge is that conversation is key to our movement, but sometimes conversation and dialogue can take the place of outcomes. And ultimately, we need to be about outcomes and a tangible result. And sessions like this are fantastic for meeting friends and getting business cards and reconnecting with others. But at the end of the day, if a meeting is not focused on how do we set ourselves towards a goal and how do we achieve that goal together, I think we've lost sight of the movement. That can take many years, and it takes a lot of perseverance as well. And conversation and sharing information is sometimes easier. But last week, we were rejoicing that 2 men we were advocating for and helping in law in Egypt were released from pretrial detention. That's a long game. If we take a case to the European Court of Human Rights, it's a long-term game, 10 years or more. In Algeria, we're still advocating for the fact that nearly 50 churches have been closed since 2017. It's a long game, and we need to be really outcomes-focused in our mind to say we're not going to give up on the fact that we want to achieve a goal. And the final thing I think is a challenge is sometimes it's such a broad issue, religious freedom, that we lose sight of the individual. And this is all about the individual. It's a name and a face and a person who has a testimony as to why they're willing to stand up for their right to believe what they believe in so deeply and so full of conviction. And there are some wonderful initiatives like the Religious Prison of Conscience Project that the UK is now adopting, and the IRF, Article 18, is really adopting on a month-by-month basis, and other groups around the world as well are focusing on the individual person. What can we do to release that individual, to see them outside of custody, to see them in freedom, and also reconnected in a community. That may not be the community they started in, but in another community afterwards, so the individual.
Wonderful. Thank you kindly. The fight for religious freedom is a long-term commitment. Persecution continues globally, and as the Holy Bible says, it will only intensify, and we are seeing it already today that it does intensify even in many of our so-called free societies. So my final question to all of you, my friends, is how can we ensure the sustainability of the IRF movement for generations to come? Sir.
Yes, this is a long-term issue, isn't it? We were talking backstage about when I was growing up and my parents were involved in mission to what was the communist world then, and this was the 70s and 80s, and this was a huge issue then, and it's always been an issue. That does not mean to say that we should not be stepping up to tackle it wherever we see it. I think that we need to, if we're going to travel far, then we have to travel together, as the proverb says. And again, maybe at the risk of repeating myself, I think it's a case of making sure that we're doing this together. We've talked about, Tristan was mentioning the importance of this community. We can't do this without civil society. It's not just about governments, although governments play an important role. I was pleased to host the UK FORB Forum in the Foreign Office for the first time last week. And I told them, the 30 or 40 organisations present there, that we need them, we need you. And I would say the same to all of those present here, whether you are in a political role like myself and Tristan, whether you're working in civil society like Lizzi does, or in another stakeholder. We need to be able to do this together because that's the only way that we will get to the destination that we want. And finally, just to remember the Imago Dei at the heart of this. Every person, as Lizzi was just saying, it's every person that matters. They have an irreducible value and dignity, and we must always keep that in our forefront of our minds.
Thank you, sir. Lizzi.
I agree with what David said, that sustainability is about collaboration. And we all have different skill sets to bring to the table and different areas of influence. And I think that because our issue is so broad and so holistic, there cannot be one single group or individual who can target this issue alone. And there are people in this room who are really on the ground and building relationships with faith groups and faith leaders, and information monitoring from that needs to kind of feed up. There are people who are fantastic with policy. We need to utilize them more. Politicians who have the voice nationally and also internationally, and international groups such as the Article 18 Alliance. Also lawyers, we need to use lawyers to bring justice to victims, and Tristan's important role of thinking about how to look after the individual with that humanitarian aspect in the aid. Collaboration means we can't do it alone. The second thing I'd say is that we need to invest in the next generation. And we need to think in 20, 30, and 40 years' time, who is going to have the passion and the expertise to carry this on? And there are many groups here that run training programs. Our organization does in 3 different parts of the world, the Arete Academy. And it thinks about how do you train up the next generation to be articulate and to be passionate in religious freedom. And there's a youth track here which has run 5 sessions, I believe. And it's great that that's supported. To really bring in those new voices. The third thing I'd say is, what are the root causes? And are we thinking about root causes as well as just responding? Again, I was speaking to a girl this morning, one of the young champions from India, and she said in India, 80% of the 800 million people under the age of 35 are unemployed, and it is her belief that most of those are committing the religious freedom violations. What are we doing to think about why are there so many religious freedom violations in specific countries, and what are we doing to think about those root causes?
Thank you so much. Secretary?
Those were extraordinarily great remarks. Maybe I can add to that something. Those who have just realized that the Hungarian government is represented on this stage might expect something provocative from me. I'm not going to be provocative. But I'm going to be honest. I think to keep the movement alive and grow, we need to thwart all the attempts for it to be hijacked by different other agendas. Nowadays are connected to religious freedom. We have to be honest, and we shouldn't be distracted by mistakenly defined political correctness. It is a common phenomenon for Western governments and politicians to be afraid to address religious issues. They say that it is politically incorrect, and instead they talk about inclusivity and so on, but inclusivity and religious freedom and peaceful coexistence of different religious groups are only possible if they keep their identity. I envision a world where different religious groups and churches can keep their strong identity and live together. And there are attempts to impose the woke agenda on the religious freedom movement. And we see it in many international organizations, attempts to hijack the issue. And I'm not going to be hurtful here. I personally much respect and like the UN Special Rapporteur for religious freedom, but she and her colleagues came to Hungary for a field visit to have interviews about religious freedom in Hungary, and I had to address questions about hate speech against LGBTQ people and why the Hungarian government criticizes George Soros and political actors, which are legit questions. We need to answer it. But we see it in many organizations that they are trying to hijack the core issue of religious freedom, and we shouldn't allow that, because we should stick to the fact that religious freedom is a first-generation human right. It is often not absurd, but we should stick to that. Otherwise, we will lose focus and edge.
Amen. Well, I want to thank on your behalf our very honest and direct and thoughtful group of panelists. So thank you, my friends, very much. And my friends, let's continue fighting and working for religious freedom, because much depends on it. And may the good Lord bless all of you in this effort. Thank you kindly.